Inside your body, right this very second, there's a critical balancing act going on. It's one of the most important, but kind of hidden, functions that's keeping you alive. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look at it. So, let me ask you something. What if the most important moment to moment sign of your health wasn't your pulse or your blood pressure, but something else entirely? It's pH. It sounds a little technical, I know, but that one question gets right to the very heart of how our bodies work. And here it is, 7.4. That's the magic number. It's like a razor's edge of perfect balance for our blood. And you might think, okay, 7.4, what's the big deal? Well, even the tiniest little shift away from that number can have massive, cascading consequences for our health. So let's talk about the body's delicate balance, because maintaining this precise pH isn't a one-and-done kind of thing. It's a constant dynamic process, and it's absolutely essential for every single cell in your body to do its job correctly. So what are we even talking about with pH? Well, to put it simply, it's just a measure of acidity. But the stakes here, they couldn't be higher. If our internal world gets too acidic or too alkaline, which just means too basic, our most critical systems, like the heart and the brain, can actually start to fail. Okay, so how on earth does the body manage this constant threat? Well, this is where we meet the regulators. Think of them as the main characters in our story, the two key systems in charge of this non-stop balancing act. And I love this analogy. We've got two key players. The lungs, they're the sprinter, and the kidneys, they're the marathon runner. See, the lungs act super fast, within minutes, managing acid by literally breathing out carbon dioxide. It's a quick, short-term fix. But the kidneys, oh, they're in it for the long haul. They manage the main base in our blood, something called bicarbonate. They take hours, maybe even days to respond, but their control is much slower, more powerful, and designed for the long term. But, what happens when even these amazing regulators get overwhelmed? Well, despite their best efforts, sometimes the scale just tips, and it can go in one of two fundamental directions. First up is acidosis, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The scale tips towards the acid side, which causes the blood's pH to drop below that critical floor of 7.35. And on the flip side, you have the opposite problem, alkalosis. Here, the scale tips towards base. This means there's either too little acid or too much base in the system, and that pushes the blood pH up past the upper limit of 745. This all boils down to the four main disorders. If the problem starts with the lungs and breathing, you get respiratory acidosis and alkalosis. But if the problem is coming from the kidneys or our body's metabolism, that's when you get metabolic acidosis and alkalosis. Each one pushes that delicate pH scale in its own unique direction. But here's the amazing part. The body doesn't just give up. This is where it fights back. It's a concept called compensation. And this is where you really see the incredible resilience of our bodies on full display. The whole idea is actually pretty simple. When one system fails, the other one works overtime to try and restore balance. It's an amazing example of teamwork. The healthy regulator, our sprinter or marathon runner, tries to pick up the slack for the one that's struggling. Let's walk through an example. So imagine there's a metabolic problem, and the kidneys, our marathon runner, are letting acid build up. Well, the lungs, our sprinter, sense this imbalance almost immediately. So what happens? Your breathing actually changes. It gets faster and deeper to blow off more of that acidic CO2. And the result? The pH gets partially corrected, all thanks to the lungs jumping in to compensate for the kidneys. Pretty cool, right? All right, so we know it can go wrong, and we know how the body fights back. But how do doctors actually figure this out in the real world? Well, it all comes down to finding the root cause. It usually all starts with a blood test called an arterial blood gas, or just ABG for short. This one test gives doctors a complete picture. It measures the pH, the carbon dioxide, and the bicarbonate levels. In other words, it's a perfect snapshot of how well our sprinter and our marathon runner are doing their jobs. And, the causes of these imbalances can be surprisingly familiar things. We're talking about severe uncontrolled diabetes, which can cause a big buildup of acids, or an anxiety attack that leads to hyperventilation. Kidney failure is a big one, of course, but even severe vomiting can throw things way off by causing you to lose a lot of stomach acid. Let's just zoom in on that anxiety attack example, because it's a great one. When someone hyperventilates, they're breathing super, super fast. All that rapid breathing blows off way too much CO2. And remember, CO2 acts like an acid in our blood. So with less acid, the scale tips and boom, you're in what's called respiratory alkalosis. It's a direct line from a common experience to this complex body chemistry. Okay, so once we know the cause, what's the solution? Well, that brings us to our final section, how we go about restoring the balance. Now, here's a really key principle of treatment. You don't just try to artificially fix the pH number. You always treat the underlying cause. I mean, think about it. It's like watering a wilting plant instead of just painting its leaves green. You fix the root problem so the body's own powerful systems can take over again. And this illustrates that idea perfectly. If the cause is diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA, you give insulin. If a drug overdose is slowing down breathing, you give an antidote. If dehydration is the problem, you give fluids. See? You always target the source of the problem. And this brings us right back to our central theme. The goal of any intervention is to let the body's own incredibly powerful balancing systems take over again. Really, medicine is just giving the body the help it needs to be its own hero. This incredible chemical balancing act is happening inside of you every single second, without you even thinking about it. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other invisible systems are working tirelessly right now just to keep you alive?